Jake Morrison sat in his chair and watched the other species talk. The big meeting hall was full of voices from 47 different worlds. Some spoke with clicks and whistles. Others used deep growls that made the floor shake. Jake kept his face calm even though his heart was beating fast. The Zilithian called Vextar stood at the front podium. His blue skin had dark spots that moved when he was excited. Today, those spots were moving a lot. He held up a data pad and started reading the new rules that would change everything for humans. The resource allocation protocol will make trade more fair for all species, Vextar said. His voice had a wet sound like he was talking underwater. Some species have taken too much, now we will fix this problem. Jake knew what was coming. The humans had been warned by their friends in the Carathian government, but hearing it out loud still felt like getting hit in the stomach. Human mining rights will be reduced from 43 worlds to 12 worlds, Vextar continued. Human shipping lanes will be cut by 60%. All human colonies built in the last 50 years are now called illegal settlements. These colonies must be emptied within 6 months. The hall got very quiet. Jake could hear his own breathing. He looked around at the other human delegates. Captain Lisa Hayes sat in the back row. Her face was like stone, but her hands were tight fists. Dr. Paul Carter shook his head slowly. Susan Wright just stared at the floor. One by one, the species voted. The Carathians voted yes, even though humans had saved them from dying out in the Void War. The Nexari voted yes, even though humans had rebuilt their whole economy after the Great Collapse. The Frilled Ones voted yes. The Rock People voted yes. The Gas Breathers voted yes. Each vote felt like a knife in Jake's back. These were species that humans had helped. Species that humans had fed and protected and taught. Species that had called humans their friends. The final count was 38 yes votes and 9 no votes. Jake stood up slowly. Everyone in the hall turned to look at him. They expected him to shout. They expected him to make angry speeches. They expected him to threaten and demand and fight. Instead, Jake just nodded once. "We understand the council's decision," he said in a quiet voice. "We will follow these new rules." The silence that followed was scary. It was the kind of silence that comes before storms. Vextar looked confused. He had been ready for human anger. He had prepared answers for human threats. But quiet acceptance was something he did not expect. Jake walked to the door with the other human delegates following behind him. Nobody spoke. Their footsteps echoed in the big hall. When they reached the exit, Jake turned around one last time. He looked at all the species that had voted against humanity. His eyes were sad but not angry. "Thank you for making your choice clear," he said. Then he left. Outside the meeting hall, Lisa Hayes waited for Jake. Her uniform was perfect as always, but her face showed how upset she was. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We follow the rules," Jake said. "We give them exactly what they voted for." Paul Carter joined them in the hallway. "Jake, if we pull out of the research stations, the whole sector will lose power within weeks. The antimatter plants need constant human supervision." "Then they should have thought about that before they voted," Jake replied. His voice was still quiet, but now it had steel in it. Susan Wright came over with tears in her eyes. "My farms feed billions of people across 14 systems. Without human knowledge, those worlds will starve." "They made their choice," Jake said. "Now they get to live with it." Lisa shook her head. "This will cause chaos across the galaxy. Trade routes will fail. Defense systems will break down. People will die." Jake stopped walking and looked at his friends. These were good people who had spent their lives helping others. They had built hospitals and schools. They had shared technology and food. They had protected weak species from strong ones. And now they were being thrown away like garbage. "For 50 years we have been the backbone of this galaxy," Jake said. "We fixed their problems. We kept their systems running. We fed their hungry and protected their weak. And they just voted to kick us out because we were too successful." He looked back at the meeting hall where the other species were still celebrating their victory. "They want us gone? Fine. But they don't get to keep the benefits of having us around. We are not slaves. We are not their servants. We are equals. or we are nothing. The next morning, Jake sent a message to every human colony, ship, and station in the galaxy. The message was short and simple. Pack up, we are leaving, take everything that belongs to us. Leave everything running on basic automatic systems. Do not sabotage anything, do not break anything, just leave. Within hours, human ships started moving, not in panic or anger, but with the calm efficiency that humans were known for. Cargo ships loaded up equipment and supplies. Passenger ships picked up colonists and workers. Military ships provided protection for the evacuation. The other species watched in growing confusion. This was not what they had expected. They thought humans would argue and fight and try to stay. They thought humans would beg for mercy and promise to be good. They did not think humans would actually leave, but leave they did. Quietly and completely, taking with them 50 years of knowledge, skill, and quiet competence that had held the galaxy together. 3 days after the vote, something strange started happening across the galaxy. Human ships began leaving their posts, but not in the messy way that most species expected. This was clean and organized. This was humans doing what humans did best. Dr. Paul Carter stood in the control room of the Titan research station and looked at the antimatter containment fields that had been running perfectly for 12 years. The blue energy streams danced behind thick protective glass. These reactors powered half the mid-rim sectors, including the homeworlds of 6 different species. Paul touched the control panel one last time. His fingers knew every button and switch, by heart. He had designed most of these systems himself. He had trained the alien technicians who were supposed to take over. But those technicians only knew how to follow basic procedures. They did not understand the deep science that made everything work. Computer, switch to automated maintenance mode, Paul said. Lock all advanced protocols with authorization code Carter 77 Alpha. The computer's voice was calm and friendly. Automated mode engaged. Advanced systems locked. Estimated operational time without human supervision, 6 to 8 months. Paul picked up his personal belongings and walked to the transport ship. Behind him, the station continued to work, but now it was like a clock with no one to wind it. Eventually, it would stop. On the agricultural world of Kepler 442b, farmer Susan Wright supervised the harvest robots as they gathered the last crop she would ever grow there. The vast hydroponic farms stretched to the horizon. Row after row of perfect plants that had never seen natural soil. These farms fed 14 different worlds, including several that had no ability to grow their own food. Susan had spent 20 years learning how to balance nutrients and control genetics to make crops grow on worlds where nothing should live. She had taught some of her knowledge to local workers, but they only knew how to follow her instructions. They did not understand why certain chemicals had to be mixed in exact amounts or why the genetic codes needed constant adjustment. The automated systems will keep basic crops growing for about 6 months, Susan told her replacement, a nervous Silithian named Kexaval. After that, you will need to figure out the advanced stuff yourself. Kexaval looked worried. But we do not know the advanced stuff. Can you leave more detailed instructions? Susan shook her head. I am leaving all the basic manuals. The advanced knowledge takes years to learn. You will have to start from the beginning like we did. She climbed into her transport without looking back. Behind her, the farms continued their work, but now they were like a garden with no gardener. Eventually, the plants would fail. At Junction 7, the critical communications hub that connected the outer territories to the core worlds, Communications Officer Danny Kim sent his final message. His fingers moved across the control board that he had operated for 8 years. This station handled billions of messages every day between hundreds of worlds. All ships, all stations, all planets, Danny said into his microphone. This is Junction 7 Control. Station is transferring to automated protocols in 30 minutes. All priority communications should be rerouted through backup systems. Good luck. The response was immediate and panicked. Messages flooded in from across the galaxy asking what was happening. Trade ships demanded to know who would guide them through the dangerous space around Junction 7. Military commanders wanted to know how they would coordinate their fleets without the central hub. Danny answered none of them. He stood up from his chair and walked to the transport bay. Behind him, the communications equipment continued to work, but now it was like a telephone system with no operators. Eventually, the calls would stop going through. The pattern repeated across the galaxy. Human doctors left hospitals after training, local staff in basic medical procedures but taking with them the knowledge of advanced surgery and genetic therapy. Human engineers shut down construction projects after showing aliens how to maintain existing buildings, but not how to design new ones. Human teachers closed schools after leaving behind basic textbooks, but taking with them the wisdom that came from decades of experience. Captain Lisa Hayes commanded the evacuation from her flagship, the destroyer New York. Her ship moved from station to station collecting human personnel and equipment. She watched the tactical displays that showed human vessels converging from across the galaxy. Merchant ships, research vessels, colony transports, military cruisers, all of them heading for the rendezvous points beyond the galactic rim. "Status report," Lisa said to her second-in-command, Lieutenant Ben Walsh. "Evacuation is 60% complete," Ben replied. "We have collected 4 million humans so far. Another 2 million are still en route. No hostile actions reported from any alien species." Lisa nodded. The aliens were confused but not angry yet. They still thought this was some kind of negotiation tactic. They still believed humans would come back after making their point. They did not understand that humans meant what they said. "Any communication from the council?" Lisa asked. "Several messages demanding explanations," Ben said. "Ambassador Morrison has not responded to any of them." Lisa looked at the star chart showing human positions. Red dots marked evacuation sites. Blue dots showed convoy routes. Green dots indicated the new territory beyond the rim where humans would build their new homes. It was a massive undertaking, but humans were good at massive undertakings. "Send a message to all human commanders," Lisa ordered. "Operation Silent Departure is proceeding on schedule. Continue evacuation protocols. Maintain radio silence with all alien governments." Across the galaxy, the aliens began to notice that things were not working as well as before. Shipments were delayed because human navigators were no longer available to plot courses through dangerous space. Power grids fluctuated because human engineers were not there to make adjustments. Communication networks had strange gaps because human technicians were not there to fix problems. But these were small problems that could be ignored for a while. The aliens told themselves that everything would be fine. They told themselves that they could replace human workers with their own people. They told themselves that humans had not been that important anyway. They were wrong, but they would not admit it yet. That realization would come later when the real consequences began to show. For now, the humans continued their quiet exodus, taking with them 50 years of expertise that had become invisible through its very reliability. 3 weeks after the humans started leaving, the first real problems began to show. Trade Captain Vorthak of the Merchant Guild stared at his navigation screen and cursed in 3 different languages. The route from Zelos Prime to the Nexari trade hub should have taken 4 days. Now he was on day 6 and still lost in the asteroid field between systems. The navigation computer kept giving him warnings about gravitational anomalies and unstable space. Before the humans left, there had always been updated route information that showed the safest paths through dangerous areas. Human navigators had spent decades mapping every safe passage and sharing that knowledge freely with all species. Now that knowledge was gone. The navigation computers still had basic star charts, but they did not know which routes were safe and which ones would get a ship destroyed. Vorthak had already passed 3 wrecked vessels that had tried to take shortcuts through unstable space. "Computer, calculate fastest route to Nexari hub," Vorthak said. "Warning. Multiple hazardous areas detected. Recommended route will add 12 days to journey. Alternative routes have high probability of hull breach or gravity well capture." Vorthak slammed his tentacle against the control panel. 12 extra days meant his cargo would spoil. His customers would cancel their orders. His profit margins would disappear. But the alternative was getting his ship torn apart by gravity. Storms, Admiral Zektoth of the Carathian Defense Fleet, faced even bigger problems. His fleet had been using human-designed tactical systems for 20 years. The combat simulations, Threat assessment protocols and fleet coordination software had all been created by human military analysts who understood space warfare better than anyone else in the galaxy. Now those systems were failing. The threat assessment programs could not adapt to new enemy tactics without human oversight. The fleet coordination software had bugs that human technicians used to fix within hours. The combat simulations were becoming useless because they needed constant updates that only humans knew how to make. "Sir, the pirate lords have attacked 3 more convoys in Sector 7, reported his aide, Commander Yextal. "Our response time was 4 hours behind schedule because the tactical computers could not plot an efficient intercept course." Zektoth growled deep in his throat. "What about the automated defense systems?" "Operating at 40% efficiency, sir. The targeting algorithms need recalibration, but we do not have the access codes. The humans locked all advanced functions before they left." Zektoth had fought beside human forces during the Void War. He had seen human tactical brilliance save entire fleets from destruction. He had voted yes on the resource allocation protocol because his government told him to, but now he was beginning to understand what that vote had really cost. On the agricultural world of New Eden, Governor Lothran watched his people start to panic as food shipments from human farms stopped arriving. The automated hydroponic systems on Kepler 442b were still running, but they were producing only basic grain crops. The complex fruits and vegetables that provided essential nutrients were no longer growing because the genetic modification programs had shut down. "How long before we face real hunger?" Lothran asked his agricultural minister. 3 months if we ration carefully," was the reply. "Less if the other farm worlds also stop producing specialty crops." Lothran had been one of the loudest voices supporting the vote against humanity. He had argued that humans were taking too many resources and needed to be put in their place. Now he was staring at supply reports that showed his world would face starvation within months. But the worst problems were happening on worlds that depended completely on human technology. President Laura Stone of New Geneva Colony was the last human administrator in the Mid-Rim. She had volunteered to stay behind for a few extra weeks to help with the transition of power. The Zilithian official who was supposed to replace her, a bureaucrat named Kelvar, looked at the control systems for the terraforming equipment and started to sweat. New Geneva was a desert world that had been made livable through human atmospheric processors and climate control systems. "These machines are very complex," Kelvar said nervously. "Are you sure the instruction manuals are complete?" Laura looked at him with sad eyes. "The manuals cover basic maintenance, but these systems need constant adjustment based on weather patterns, solar radiation, atmospheric composition, and dozens of other factors. My team and I spent 15 years learning how to keep this world habitable." "But surely you can teach us quickly?" Laura shook her head. "It took me 15 years to learn. It will take you 15 years to learn. The automated systems will keep working for maybe 6 months. After that, you will need to figure it out yourselves." Kelvar looked panicked. "What happens if the atmospheric processors fail?" "The atmosphere will become toxic within weeks. The temperature will rise 40 degrees. The water will evaporate. This world will become uninhabitable again." Laura picked up her last bag and headed for the transport ship. "I left all the manuals in the administrative office. Good luck." Behind her, Kelvar stared at the control panels that kept 3 million colonists alive. The displays showed thousands of readings that meant nothing to him. Warning lights were already starting to flash as some systems detected problems that no one knew how to fix. Back on the homeworld of Zelos Prime, Minister Vexitar faced increasingly angry questions from other government officials. The economic reports coming in from across their territory were all bad. Trade was slowing down. Production was falling. Critical systems were failing. "This is temporary," Vexitar insisted during a heated cabinet meeting. "We can replace their functions. We always knew humans would try to make themselves seem indispensable." Finance Minister Kelthan threw a data pad onto the table. "Look at these numbers. Shipping costs are up 300% because vessels keep getting lost without human navigation data. Manufacturing is down 60% because we cannot maintain the efficiency protocols humans designed. Agricultural output is falling because the genetic modification systems are shutting down. We can learn these things ourselves," Vexitar argued. We are not stupid. No, we are not stupid, agreed Minister Welkus from the Science Department. But we are starting from zero. Humans spent 50 years developing their expertise. They built their knowledge step by step, learning from mistakes and sharing information freely. We threw all of that away with one vote. Vextar slammed his hand on the table. They were taking too many resources. They were becoming too powerful. We had to act. Were they? Asked Kelthan quietly. Or were they just very good at what they did? Look at this report from the Titan Research Station. Power output has dropped 30% since human oversight ended. The antimatter containment fields are becoming unstable. If that station fails, 8 worlds will lose power completely. Around the galaxy, similar conversations were happening in government buildings and corporate boardrooms. The quiet efficiency that humans had brought to everything they touched was becoming obvious only through its absence. Like the foundation of a building, it had been invisible until it was gone. 2 months after the vote, the galaxy was falling apart. Commander Ben Walsh stood in the control room of the Titan defense platform and watched the final human technician pack his equipment. Outside the viewports, alien ships waited desperately for the humans to change their minds. The massive defense platform had protected 3 entire sectors from pirate raids and hostile alien attacks for 20 years. Its weapons systems could destroy enemy fleets from 3 light-years away. Its sensor arrays could detect threats long before they became dangerous. Its communication networks coordinated defense forces across dozens of worlds. But all of these systems required human oversight. The alien technicians could push buttons and follow basic procedures, but they could not adapt to new situations or solve complex problems. They were like children trying to operate machinery they did not understand. Sir, we are receiving another priority message from Minister Vexistar, reported technician Amy Foster, one of the last humans on the platform. Ben shook his head. No responses to any government communications, those are our orders. The messages had been coming for weeks. First they were demands for explanations, then they were offers of amnesty, then they were promises of restored privileges. Now they were desperate pleas for help as the consequences of the vote became impossible to ignore. A new ship appeared on the sensor screen. Ben recognized the distinctive shape of a Zilithian government vessel. His communications officer looked at him, with raised eyebrows. Let them dock, Ben said. But security protocols remain in effect. 20 minutes later, Minister Vextar himself walked into the control room. The Zilithian looked terrible. His usually perfect blue skin was pale and blotchy. His ornate robes were wrinkled. His confident manner had been replaced by something that looked like panic. Commander Walsh, you cannot do this, Vextar said without any greeting. Billions of people depend on this facility. Ben looked at him with eyes that held no anger, only sadness. Yes, they do. The Korathian fleet reports 17 pirate attacks in the last week. The Nexari trade routes are being raided constantly. 3 colony worlds have been attacked by slave traders. Without this platform, the entire sector is defenseless. That is not our problem anymore, Ben replied quietly. Vextar moved closer, his voice becoming desperate. We can negotiate, we can modify the resource allocation protocol, we can give humans better terms. Can you bring back the dead? Ben asked. Vextar looked confused. What dead? The 15,000 people who died on Kepler 442b when the atmospheric processors failed, Ben said. The 12,000 who died in the shipping accidents when vessels got lost without proper navigation data. The 8,000 who died in the hospital on New Geneva when the medical systems shut down. The 6,000 who died in the pirate attacks that you could have prevented if you had not voted to kick us out. Vexitar stepped backward. Those were accidents, unfortunate consequences that no one could have predicted. Ben shook his head. We predicted them. We warned you what would happen if you forced us to leave. You did not listen because you thought we were bluffing. Please, Vextar said, and the word sounded strange coming from a politician who was used to giving orders. People are dying. Children are starving. Worlds are becoming uninhabitable. You have to help us. Why? Ben asked. You voted to throw us out. You said we were taking too much and needed to be put in our place. Well, this is what our place looked like. This is what we were doing while you thought we were just taking resources. Vextar tried a different approach. What do you want? More? Mining rights? Better trade agreements? We can give you anything you ask for. Ben walked to the control panel and began the final shutdown sequence. We do not want anything from you anymore. We tried being part of your community. We tried being good neighbors. We shared our knowledge and helped your people and protected your worlds. And you thanked us by voting to kick us out. The platform's main power began winding down. Lights flickered and went dark. The massive weapons systems powered off one by one. The sensor arrays stopped scanning for threats. The communication networks went silent. You cannot leave us defenseless, Vextar pleaded. Watch us, Ben said. 6 hours later, the Titan defense platform was completely shut down. The 3 sectors it had protected were now wide open to attack. Enemy forces would detect the platform's deactivation within days and begin planning raids on the undefended worlds. Ben and his team took the last transport to the rendezvous point beyond the galactic rim. Behind them, the platform drifted in space like a dead whale, its massive bulk serving as a monument to what the galaxy had thrown away. Meanwhile, in the unexplored regions beyond known space, human ships were building something new. Captain Amy Foster stood on the bridge of the colony ship Horizon and watched construction begin on New Terra Prime, the first capital of the Human Federation. The new colony was different from the old human settlements. It was designed to be completely self-sufficient with no dependence on alien trade or cooperation. The humans had learned a hard lesson about the cost of trust, and they would not make the same mistake twice. Status report, Amy said to her engineering chief. Primary habitat domes are operational. Power grid is stable. Agricultural systems are producing surplus food. Manufacturing facilities are online. Defensive perimeter is established. We can support 50,000 colonists with room for expansion. Amy nodded. Around New Terra Prime, other human colonies were being established. Each one was a fortress of human knowledge and capability. Each one was a statement that humanity would never again allow itself to be vulnerable to alien politics. The message had gone out to every human in the galaxy. Come home. Come to the new worlds where humans looked after humans. Come to the places where human expertise was valued instead of taken for granted. Come to the Federation where no alien council could vote to throw them out of their own homes. And they came. Scientists and farmers, soldiers and teachers, engineers and doctors, all of them bringing their knowledge and skills to build something better than what they had left behind. The galaxy they abandoned continued its slow collapse. Trade, networks failed. Defense systems broke down. Agricultural worlds faced famine. Industrial centers stopped producing. Communication systems developed gaps that could not be fixed. The aliens tried to replace human expertise with their own people, but 50 years of accumulated knowledge could not be learned overnight. They tried to rebuild the systems that humans had created, but they did not understand the principles that made those systems work. They tried to maintain the networks that humans had designed, but they lacked the experience to solve complex problems. Some species swallowed their pride and sent diplomatic missions to the human colonies, begging for help and offering generous terms for renewed cooperation. But the humans were done with the old ways. If the aliens wanted human help, they would have to prove they had learned to treat humans as equals, instead of convenient servants. 1 year after the vote that changed everything, Ambassador Jake Morrison walked back into the Galactic Council chambers. But this time, he was not there as a member begging for acceptance. He came as the representative of the Human Federation, a collection of 37 worlds and over 200 space stations that had grown beyond the rim of known space. The chamber looked different now. Several seats sat empty where species had once sent their delegates. The Trilithian Republic had collapsed when their trade networks failed without human logistics support. The Vegan Collective had split into warring factions when their communication systems broke down. The Outer Ring Alliance had simply vanished when their defensive fleets could no longer coordinate without human tactical expertise. The remaining representatives looked tired and desperate. Gone was the confident arrogance that had marked the vote a year ago. These were people who had learned what happened when you threw away something valuable without understanding what you were losing. Minister Vextar was still there, but he looked like he had aged 10 years. His blue skin was dull and marked with stress patterns. His ornate robes had been replaced with simple clothing. His confident bearing had been broken by 12 months of crisis management and failure. Ambassador Morrison, Vextar said as Jake took his place at the speaking podium. We are honored by your presence. We hope that you have come to discuss renewed cooperation between our peoples. Jake looked around the chamber at the faces of the aliens who had voted to kick humanity out of the galaxy. Some looked ashamed, others looked angry, most just looked scared. I have come to offer a simple proposition, Jake said in the same quiet voice that had marked his last appearance in this chamber. Trade agreements between equal partners, technology exchange based on mutual benefit, defense pacts that protect all members, all conducted with proper contracts and guaranteed rights. The terms that Jake outlined were fair but firm. No more taking human expertise for granted. No more assuming human compliance with unfavorable decisions. No more voting to restrict human activities while depending on human competence to maintain galactic stability. The humans would share their knowledge, but only with species that proved they could be trusted. They would provide defense assistance, but only to allies who honored their agreements. They would participate in trade networks, but only as equal partners who could not be voted out when they became inconvenient. These terms are very different from our previous arrangements, said Senator Kelton of the Nexari Financial Exchange. His government had been one of the few to survive the economic collapse, but their trade empire was a shadow of what it had been. Yes, they are, Jake agreed. The previous arrangements did not work out well for humanity. We gave freely and trusted, completely, and were rewarded with betrayal. We will not make that mistake again. Admiral Zektoth of the Carathian Defense Fleet stood up slowly. His proud military bearing was unchanged, but his eyes showed the weight of the disasters that had followed the human exodus. Ambassador Morrison, the Carathian government wishes to formally apologize for our vote in support of the resource allocation protocol. We did not understand the consequences of our decision. We would like to request immediate restoration of the mutual defense pact between our peoples. Jake studied the Carathian admiral for a long moment. Zektoth had been a good ally during the Void War. He had fought beside human forces and shown respect for human sacrifice. But he had also voted to throw humanity out when his government ordered him to. The Carathian fleet was attacked by pirates 17 times in the last month, Jake said. Your response time was too slow to prevent raids on 3 colony worlds. Your tactical systems are operating at less than 50% efficiency. Your sensor networks have gaps that hostile forces are exploiting. Zektoth nodded grimly. This is all true. We need human assistance to restore our defensive capabilities. Why should we help you? Jake asked. You voted to kick us out. You supported measures that cost human lives and destroyed human communities. You chose alien politics over human friendship. Why should we trust you again? The question hung in the air like a blade. Zektoth had no good answer because there was no good answer. Trust, once broken, could not be simply voted back into existence. Because we learned from our mistake, Zektoth said finally. Because we understand now what we threw away. Because we will never vote against humanity again. Words, Jake said. The same words that politicians always use when they want something. What guarantees can you offer? What assurances can you provide that this will not happen again when some other crisis makes it convenient to blame humanity? The chamber was silent. The aliens had no guarantees to offer because they had already proven that their promises meant nothing when tested by political pressure. Jake walked to the center of the chamber and activated a holographic display. It showed the current state of the galaxy with red zones marking areas of conflict, yellow zones showing economic collapse, and green zones indicating stable regions. 60% of known space is now either uninhabitable or too dangerous for civilian travel, Jake said. Trade volume has dropped by 70%. 3 major wars have started because defensive alliances could not coordinate their responses. 14 billion people have died from starvation, disease, and violence that could have been prevented. The display zoomed in on specific regions. The Titan research station failed completely 6 months ago. 8 worlds lost power and their populations had to be evacuated. The Kepler agricultural systems produced enough food to feed 2 billion people last year. This year they will produce enough to feed 200 million. Jake turned to face the assembled delegates. This is what the galaxy looks like without human involvement. This is what you voted for when you decided that humanity was too successful and needed to be put in their place. Some of the aliens looked away in shame. Others tried to maintain their dignity. A few still looked angry as if this was somehow humanity's fault for actually leaving. However, Jake continued, the Human Federation believes in the possibility of redemption. We believe that people can learn from their mistakes and become better. We are willing to offer our assistance to those species that can prove they have learned the value of cooperation over domination. The terms that Jake outlined were generous but demanding. Species that wanted human help would have to sign binding treaties that guaranteed human rights and prevented discriminatory voting. They would have to open their governments to human oversight in areas where humans provided critical services. They would have to prove their good faith through actions, not just words. Most importantly, they would have to accept that humanity was no longer desperate for acceptance. The Human Federation was thriving beyond the rim. Their colonies were prosperous, their fleets were strong. Their technology was advancing rapidly without the need to share every breakthrough with ungrateful aliens. We do not need you anymore, Jake said simply. We tried being part of your community and you threw us out. Now we have built our own community and it works very well. If you want to be part of it, you will have to prove that you deserve the privilege. The vote that followed was very different from the one a year earlier. This time the aliens were voting not on whether to accept humanity, but on whether humanity would accept them. The irony was not lost on anyone in the chamber. Species after species voted to accept the new terms. The Carathians were among the first to sign the Mutual Defense Pact. The Nexari quickly agreed to the trade agreements. Even some of the species that had voted against humanity a year ago swallowed their pride and requested permission to join the new arrangements. But not all of them. The Zilithian government, led by Minister Vexistar, rejected the human terms as too restrictive and demanding. Several other species followed their lead, choosing pride over pragmatism. Jake was not surprised. He had expected some species to refuse. That was their choice to make. As the session ended and Jake prepared to leave, Vextar approached him one final time. The Zilithian minister looked older and more desperate than ever. This is not over, Vextar said quietly. The council will find other solutions. We do not need human charity. Jake looked at him with something that might have been pity. Good luck with that, he said. Outside the council chambers, the galaxy slowly began to adapt to a new reality. Humanity had not conquered through force or manipulated through cunning. They had simply demonstrated the power of walking away from those who did not value them. The species that signed the new agreements found their situations improving rapidly as human expertise returned to solve their problems. The species that refused the agreements continued their slow decline into chaos and irrelevance. And beyond the rim, in the growing empire of the Human Federation, humanity continued to build something better, something stronger, something that would never again depend on the goodwill of those who had proven they had none to give. The lesson had been taught and learned. Respect was not something that could be voted away or legislated out of existence. And some things, once broken, could only be rebuilt on entirely new foundations.